Accessing library computer data.
Out there are no saints. Just people.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. We're continuing our run through Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Right now we're up to the episode called Body Parts. It's the 25th, the penultimate episode of the fourth season. Aired on June 10th, 1996. Teleplay goes to Hans Beimler. Story credit goes to Louis P. DeSantis and Robert J. Bolivar. Directed by Captain Sisko at this point, Avery Brooks. In this episode, when Quark learns that he is dying, he auctions his vacuum-desiccated body to raise capital. Meanwhile, a shuttle accident prompts Dr. Bashir to transfer Keiko's baby into Major Kira. We're joined by Clay. Clay, how are you?
I'm good. You know, I'm a little disappointed because when this started, when I first saw the way this was going, I got really excited because I thought this was going to be like a David Cronenberg movie, given the name and the setup and everything. But then it just turned out to be like heartwarming.
Why is it called Body Parts?
I don't know. I feel like it's a little bit. Well, I mean, Quark is no. Yeah, it's a bad title.
It's a title that like vaguely connects to everything, but not really. Like like a baby, you could kind of refer to it as a body part, I suppose. It doesn't really line up with Quark or anything, but yeah, it's not very Cronenbergy. It is heartwarming. Some might say melodramatic, but I guess we're going to get into that as soon as we take a break. I'm going to play an audio clip. Me and Clay are going to come back and we're going to break down Body Parts.
Quark, huh? I just received an odd message from a Dr. Orpax of Ferengi. He wanted me to tell you that he's very sorry, but you don't have Doric syndrome. Does that make any sense to you?
You don't have Doric syndrome?
Do you know what that means, Rob?
It means you're gonna live!
It means I get to sue Dr. Orpax for malpractice! Oh! And I'm gonna live.
So this is a little tangential, Clay, but the past couple episodes I've been battling a cold, and I noticed one thing from me recording with a cold is that in an effort to not cough on the mic, I don't really go off on tangents quite a bit, which is like, it's like I'm fighting against my cold and I don't want to cough, so I just try to get my point out as like quickly as possible. So I feel liberated a little bit here. I'm probably going to start coughing like crazy, but I feel like I'm back in the swing of things where I can actually enjoy the process of recording without having to take a sip of tea and drink a cough drop. Unfortunately,
Well, take it for a test drive, man. What do you want to go off on a tangent on first? How do you feel about I don't know, dentists?
Dentists, I don't mind the dentist. I figure because I'm paying for the insurance, I should go. And my father is a person who hates the dentist, pays for insurance, and whenever he goes, it's for like a catastrophic tooth contamination problem. Mm-hmm. And he always has to have like these major surgeries, but I go every 6 months. I haven't had a cavity in years. Feel pretty good about it. I don't mind the dentist, actually, although I will say that I feel like the cleaning process is taking longer and longer the older I get. I remember it used to be pretty quick, like a 15-minute thing, and now it's stretching upwards of like 40 minutes, and that's too long. Yeah.
Not a fan.
Let's point and counterpoint on the Pensky podcast. So let's talk about Body Parts, which has two distinct plot lines in it. It has a Ferengi episode plotline, and it has a heartwarming Little House on the Prairie type sci-fi drama on the other hand, featuring the O'Briens and Major Kira. What do you want to talk about first? Which do you want to get out of the way before you get into the meat of this episode?
Let's talk about the Kira, the O'Brien thing first, because I was really disappointed by that storyline.
I'm going to say that the producers like the storyline so much, it's a part of every single episode the rest of the series, just so you know.
Interesting. Well, so the one thing I did want to say, generally, that I find interesting about this episode, and maybe I'm wrong, but this is where it kind of really stood out to me for the first time. This feels like the most purely serialized episode that they've done in a while, if not ever, in that it shakes up the status quo of not just two characters, but a bunch of characters, really. And by the end of the episode, they don't really turn it back to the way it was. Like even when they serialized stuff previously, it's generally not gigantic life changes. It's just like the next chapter of a story, sort of. And this one, they're shaking everything up. Like there's nothing involving the Dominion War that's going to result in Kira being pregnant.
Right.
That's a pretty big change. And Quark, I kind of gets his bar back at the end, but even there, I'm not really sure how he can really work there. But you know, they have the "It's a Wonderful Life" ending, which is nice. But both of those things are fairly substantial shakeups to the way characters behave and characters act. But yeah, as far as so it doesn't surprise me that they continue with the baby thing, and I'm glad that they do. But I was a little.
It's not much longer. It's until Nana Visitor has her real baby that they'll get rid of this. So it's another couple episodes into the next season before they stop doing this.
Is she actually pregnant here?
Yeah, she's pregnant with Dr. Bashir's child in real life.
Ooh, scandalous.
So that's why if there's one criticism, it's that storyline kind of comes out of nowhere, and it's because she was starting to show at this point, and they had to make a decision whether or not they wanted to do the traditional you shoot a woman from the neck up in all of her scenes not show her as pregnant, or they thought that
Kira gets a new giant coat.
Ira Stephen Bear's wife actually came up and suggested the idea that they should work the Keiko pregnancy, which had already been established, into it, and they tried to do a sci-fi twist on it. This is the end result.
Well, I don't know if you knew this, but I think the actors who play Kira and Bashir actually dated for a while during the show.
They did more than date, Clay. They did more than date. We're making fun of a commenter who thought that we could not possibly review this series without knowing every single factoid about the personal lives of the actors involved. But
thank you for explaining the joke.
I will say that the excuse me, the problem here, the problem with that storyline is that it comes out of nowhere, and I feel like this is like the worst version of serialization that you can do. Like there's really no conflict in that storyline whatsoever. It's really weird. It really feels like they just did it to get the pieces in place. And you know, as I feel like there's a lot of ways you can go with it. Like the thing about Keiko being upset that she isn't caring for the baby, I think is a really true to life thing that they don't really do too much with. The fact that Kira just moves in at the end is like almost creepy cult-like to me. Like that Molly is calling her aunt Kira and stuff. Like that seems really bizarre. No one has a problem with it. Kira doesn't have a problem with being a ex-soldier terrorist person who now has to become a mother role. Like there's no...
She seems to know a lot about how Bajoran childbirth goes, even though she's, as far as I know, has never even been within earshot of that.
No, never shown any mothering technique. But
what's his face going to think about this?
Who's that? Oh, Shakar.
Her boyfriend there.
Yeah, Shakar. That was the other plot line they were considering. He knocks her up, and that would be the other way to get it. They decided to go for this. But mostly I'm disappointed that, you know, DS9 is considered to be the most mature and adult of the Star Treks, and not once does O'Brien float the idea of, I believe it's pronounced menage a trois with these two. So it's really a letdown on all levels. Well, what did you think about the overall quality of this storyline, and what? I'm very interested in what you thought about it, because I don't really like it. I think it's pretty clunky.
Yeah, well, it's funny. I for a second when they were like, Miles, tell her what you suggested, I was like, oh boy. I don't think I'm watching the right kind of Star Trek for what I think is going to happen.
He's like,
here.
Keiko, I told you that in confidence.
Yeah. I think it's clunky. I find it disappointing because it comes out of nowhere, and then it doesn't really amount to a story so much. It's just like, yeah, she's pregnant now, and now, you know, they got to kind of deal with it. Like, the reason I said I was disappointed by it is you have a title called Body Parts, and it starts off with a magical baby switch, and my mind instantly goes to, okay, body horror. I'm excited about this. This is going to get weird. It's going to get funky.
Bashir is going to have to terminate the pregnancy with a shotgun by the end of it.
Or, I mean, something like that, maybe. I don't know. Maybe there's like a psychic mind battle and like one of their heads blows up. I don't know. But it was none of that. And it was just like, I guess the concept is kind of interesting, but they didn't do anything with it.
Yeah.
Except make Keiko and O'Brien kind of like sad that someone else's character. I don't know. It just wasn't really, I mean, it was perfectly like normal, but it wasn't really that interesting.
Yes.
And so how did they do it in the first place? Did they use the transporter?
Yes. I believe that's what they did. That he transported the baby out.
I think it's funny that they go to the lengths of explaining why they can't switch the baby back, but they just kind of gloss over all of the other technical questions of how they did it the first time. Like, I'm pretty sure, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I've never had a baby. I've never worked in the field. I don't think you can just like take a baby out and put it in somebody else. Right? You can't do that, right? It's a little bit more complicated than that.
Yeah, well, the first couple times we tried, it didn't work out too well, so I assume you can't do it as a rule, but especially into a different species, which is an interesting twist that they do.
Yeah, like there's lots of, all of the things Bashir talks about on the other side where he's like, yeah, there's all sorts of like vascular connections and all this kind of stuff. I'm pretty sure that happens on the human side too, with a natural birth.
Yep.
That you can't just go in there with like a melon baller and just scoop it out.
You'd be surprised.
Interdimensional transportation melon baller.
You know what I like about that scene actually though is I like the way the actors play it, where Bashir is being a very doctorly thing, and Sisko is trying to like cheer up O'Brien from what's happened, and he's trying to be like, "Doctor, everything's going to be okay, right?" And he's like, "Well, yes, after I connect all the vascular things and blah 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 and all this technical stuff." And Sisko is trying to please O'Brien and make him a little bit happier. I know what you're saying. I know what you're saying though.
I think it's fairly interesting when you look at what they do here as far as like dramatic suspension of disbelief goes, because I feel like you're willing to accept one unrealistic thing, but if they followed that up with a second unrealistic thing, then you'd be like, no, this is stupid.
Right.
So like you're willing to accept, oh yeah, they used the transporter to transport the baby into Kira. But if they were to come back with some other unrealistic thing on the other side, you're like, no, this doesn't work. This doesn't make any sense.
Yeah,
but since they come back with a realistic explanation of why they can't do it again, you're kind of like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah, like it almost feels like it's wasting. It almost feels like it's wasting script time to me when they have to do stuff like that. When they have to think of like, well, why can't you switch it back? It feels like, well, this is a satisfying ending, but I don't really feel satisfied in terms of how this is going as a story because, as I say, no one has any problem with what's going on here. I really thought that for a script that's written by a man and this writing staff is entirely male, I thought that the Keiko being concerned about not being able to be with her baby anymore was a very, very realistic thing. Like from a personal experience, that feels like that is like a home run hit of a story idea. And they didn't really do anything with it. It's so easily resolved. And I was thinking that on a more serialized story, right, what happens here would have longer lasting impacts because the characters of Keiko and Kira would not feel like they just met each other. You know what I mean? Like, if you have a really serialized story going on here, you can use this baby thing as sort of a twist on a relationship that those two had previously had, and you can build on this feeling that Keiko has over a couple episodes and have it like reflect into other things, and it can draw storylines into it. Here, because of the nature of the show, the idea, while it's a story that's serialized and it's going to continue for a little while, feels so clunky and by the numbers that there's nothing tying this into the universe that's going on, and everyone's acting very weird. Like the O'Briens are very happy to have have Kira living with them, and Kira just moves in for no reason. She lives like down the hallway. Why does she have to move in with them? And it's just all weird like that. Like in a more serialized, more modern show, I think this storyline would actually be better suited for that kind of storytelling, where this is hindered a little bit by the still very episodic nature of the show.
Yeah, I would agree. They're not really characters that have any connection to each other, and then once they get into this stuff, it's not really Keiko's hesitancy or not negative feelings, but
Jealousy.
disappointment.
It's jealousy, I
Yeah,
think, a
jealousy.
little bit.
Yeah, her jealousy doesn't really amount to much, and she gets over pretty quickly.
Yes.
Which, great. I mean, that's good for their relationship as people. But a great story, maybe it doesn't make.
No, and you could even do Miles O'Brien now has to treat a superior as kind of a wife. Like he doesn't even really seem to care. So I had one question that's a little bit tangential to this. Is Chief Miles O'Brien, a good character?
Yeah, I don't think he's a particularly that's a good question. I mean, I don't think he's a bad character. I don't think he's particularly he doesn't really stand out so much. But as far as what he does goes, I think he's fine. Do you think he's a bad character?
I think that he is. It's weird because coming from TNG into this, I feel like he had a more defined personality on TNG in some ways. Like he was more of he was a do-gooder, but he was kind of like the nuts and bolts, like regular guy do-gooder. And here they've kind of turned him grumpy and a little bit like castrated, and not even in just like in relationship to his wife, but he has no agency in a lot of his stories. Like he's just kind of floats along and is doing things for other people. And I don't really even, the grumpiness is fine because I think the grumpiness plays off Bashir's optimism well. So when they're paired together, it makes a lot of sense. But
yeah,
here it doesn't. He doesn't feel like he ever settles or is ever like of his own path or like has anything that he wants to do is a reasonable decision that he wants to make. It always either feels childish or it feels like he's just being guided along by his wife or he's doing other things for other people. I don't know. I've just been, the more we see of him, the less impressed I am by, especially in terms of the other characters on the show. He feels less well drawn than a lot of the others do.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think he does a lot of the stuff he does is he's actually surprisingly whiny when you think about it.
Yeah.
Like you're saying, he is kind of childish. A lot of the ways he reacts to stuff is kind of like, no, well, I can't go to the holodeck, Mom.
Yeah.
That kind of reaction.
Yeah.
I have to deal with my stupid kids today. Bigora.
My one and a half kids. Yeah, I know. Yeah. He is. He's very petulant in a lot of ways. And it's kind of a weird character trait for someone who the show always puts in these heroic. A lot of his other episodes are very heroic, like when he goes through the imprisonment and stuff like that. It's an odd combination.
Yeah, I guess I would say he's probably surprisingly less well drawn than the rest of them. And this is a good jumping off point to talk about the rest of the story.
Yeah.
But I think part of that might be because he doesn't really fit the same characterization as everybody else on the show. Because as we've talked about previously many times, everybody on Deep Space Nine more or less is some sort of an outcast or an outsider. And O'Brien really isn't that. He's just a guy, Yeah. I mean, he doesn't really have any backstory that would, he doesn't have any demons from his past, unless you count the Union uprising of his great-great-grandfather or whatever. So he's kind of an empty vessel as far as storylines go. So it's nice that they found a use for him with Bashir and stuff. But yeah, generally he's not like, if you put everybody in a room together, right? I feel like he is the least interesting person in that room.
Yes. Yeah. He has the least going on in his backstory that you can draw from. So the storylines tend to just gravitate towards him suffering or him doing sort of odd things like this. But it is weird. And you you bring it up because the Quark storyline is basically his version for Quark of the Worf storyline, which is how you are trying to fit in with a culture that is alien to you and you want to go home, but your home culture has rejected you more than this adopted culture has. And the outsider thing is really, it's really coming into form about how like all of these characters are outsiders on DS9. DS9 is like a purgatory for normal people, basically. Like you go there and you sort of learn how to get along and how to fix yourself. And I think the Quark stuff, the Quark stuff works. I won't say this is a bad Ferengi episode. It's hamstrung by all the problems that all Ferengi episodes have to me, which is that Ferengi culture is too farcical for me to take seriously. And when they, I was trying to really pin this down. Ferengi culture in this show feels farcical, and as a result, like they're sort of like the way that they treat what they want, which is business and commerce and all that stuff. It does not resonate with anyone as a viewer because no one, even like the most like strident capitalist, is not talking like a Ferengi. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But the stuff like Klingon vengeance and Klingon honor and Cardassian sort of guile and Cardassian like big brother nature, that really resonates with like existence as a human. So you can tie yourself into those stories and feel like they mean something. Ferengi episodes always kind of have to be a joke because their culture is a joke. So when they try to do something serious with it, they kind of have to do this like overly saccharine ending, which I actually like the ending, but it is a very saccharine, like we're all friends together.
Yeah, I agree, but at the same time, I like this. This is one of the more enjoyable Ferengi episodes for me.
Mm-hmm.
I thought the stuff I really liked how well. First of all, it's clear I think that Avery Brooks put all of his directing muscle, at least his actor directing muscle, into this stuff because it feels like Quark is channeling Avery Brooks in some of these scenes with how over the top he's going with his emotions and stuff. But
a lot of backstage footage of Avery just saying more, go bigger, go bigger.
Yes. And obviously, Jeffrey Combs is always going to be a plus in anything.
Brunt is a good returning character, the Ferengi FCA agent. I don't know if you've noticed this, but a nice touch they do for the Ferengi is the better they are at being Ferengi in terms of being businessmen, the bigger their ears are. Have you noticed that?
I didn't notice that, no.
So Brunt, being the sort of non-businessman bureaucrat IRS agent, has very tiny ears. And the original Ferengi who wrote the rules has the biggest ears out of all of them. I think it's a nice touch, yeah.
Yeah. No, that's pretty good. I like that. But I like that they kind of they finally verbalized all of the things. Excuse me, sorry. They finally verbalized all of the times that Quark has gone against his Ferengi nature and sort of like made him face up to the fact that he is not as hardcore as he thinks he is.
Mm-hmm.
Which then obviously means that he has become an outcast to his own people, and that he has to kind of reconcile the very similar to I feel like it's a little bit different than Worf because like I think that Quark in the back of his mind thinks that nothing is wrong. I think at least maybe not anymore, but I think up until this point, I don't think Quark always has a rationalization as to why he's doing things.
Right.
And he thinks that anytime he walks into a bar in Ferenginar, he's going to be greeted with open arms. He doesn't realize that he's an outcast.
Yes.
So
yes, I'd agree with that.
Having this episode actually bring it to the forefront and be like, no, you're as much of an outcast as anybody else is. You just don't want to admit it. I like that. And I think it's I think you can do that with Quark and not really have it change the way he acts with anybody because he's still going to do that stuff, but he's going to be very begrudging about it. He's never going to admit that he's doing it because he likes you, that kind of thing.
What's interesting is that the previous episodes that did this about Quark kind of always staged it as he was doing it. The out that he took, which was the non-Ferengi out, was what's best for everybody, and it wasn't. It wasn't really about him sort of rejecting Ferengi culture. It was more like he needed to do this to keep everything on the level with everything. Like he needed things to go back to the status quo. So we always adopted these non-Ferengi outcomes. And whether that's like when he gave the Union vacation time and all that stuff, like that's what I mean by the Ferengi cultures. Like their storylines are so silly. But I love
Ferengi heaven, by the way.
Yeah, Ferengi.
I love the description of it where he's talking about the great treasury and the registrar accepting his bribe to get in. I love that stuff.
It makes me think very much of the DuckTales, The Vault. That's kind of what it reminds me of. They're just swimming around in money.
I also like that when you get to Ferengi heaven, they have like giant, what looks like, remember in Spaceballs, the giant statue of yogurt?
Yep.
It looks like the head from that statue.
And Quark accepts in this episode that he's kind of the outcast, and the whole reason Brunt is so antagonistic towards him is because Brunt has that scene where he explains that you disgust me because of all these things that you've turned your back on the Ferengi way, like you give vacation time and all that stuff.
Right.
So the whole reason he's being antagonistic towards him is because he views Quark as kind of an outsider who is not living up to the Ferengi culture. And I agree it's not exactly the same as Worf. It's similar enough to the point where it now feels almost super obvious that the show is commenting on how much of an outsider everyone is, you know? And maybe that's kind of a little bit of a negative towards it, but maybe not. It's Quark gets his moment to shine and he gets his moment to have this sort of realization. But I like the episode. What I do like about the episode is I think that they're getting better at making the Ferengi comedy work. And I think my favorite joke in this episode is when Bashir comes in and tells Quark that he's not going to die. And then Rom's like, do you know what this means? And Quark says, it means I get to sue the doctor for malpractice, which is, I think that's actually a very good joke and it fits the character. But they're moving away from sort of broad, dumb comedy and at least grounding it a little bit in what a Ferengi would actually think and do.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah, it is so weird though, because it's like you can't. You're listening. Well, you're listening to Quark have a fairly serious scene, but it can't be serious because everything that he's saying is some sort of money pun.
Yeah,
and then on top of that, you've got Rom over there with his stupid David Duchovny face, talking like a cartoon dog. It's very difficult to take it seriously. But I think it's nice because when they do get serious, I feel like it works somehow that much better because I feel like Rom in particular is surprisingly well used. Because he's so goofy and
you seem to like Rom quite a bit. You've commented before on like you like the relationship and you like Rom.
I do because with him, he's so doofy looking, and the stuff he says is fairly goofy. But when they dial him in, it feels that much more endearing because he is actually being serious and he's not being kind of a dumbass. And it's a good foil to Quark's seriousness, for lack of a better term.
Quark's sort of the cynic and his brother's the optimist too.
Yeah,
which they pair each other off. Yeah,
and I feel like the difference between them is Rom kind of knows he's ridiculous, but Quark does not know he's ridiculous.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think they pair each other. I think when the I think his name is Max Grodinchek, when he gets to play the older Ferengi, I think it shows that he's I don't know, when I see him playing Rom, I'm always like, is this guy a good actor or not? Or is is he just good at playing this goofy? But he actually plays that other Ferengi very differently. And I was impressed by that. I thought it was a good example of like giving that actor something else to do. And it's not the actor's limiting himself to that role. It's like the role was clearly, they were calling for this level of goofiness out of Rom.
Yeah, definitely.
The other Jeffrey Combs, we should always is always excellent. He seems to be on every other episode now at this point, but he returns as Brunt, which is good. I love the Garak and Quark scenes in this. One of the patrons has a comment. I'm going to spoil it now, but he would have liked the second half of the episode just to be Garak trying to kill Quark in like Wile E. Coyote type ways for the rest of the episode. That would be
a much more interesting episode than watching Kira and Keiko discuss
changing
lower
diapers,
back pillows. Yeah.
I know Brian's face during that whole thing. Brian's disgusted face is very funny. But yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I will say, I really like that stuff, but it's kind of unresolved, isn't it? Is there a point where, I can't remember, is there a point where he tells Garak he doesn't want to be killed anymore?
No, I assume they just drop it and he doesn't go through with that. I don't think Garak would have done it anyway.
What I thought they were going to do is I thought when he was having the dream, when Brunt was strangling him, I thought he was going to wake up and Garak was going to be on top of him strangling him. And they was going to be like, no, stop it, that kind of thing.
Yeah. That was, That was an interesting way to wrap it up because there were a lot of ways to view that. I wonder if that's intentional or if it's just kind of a everything coming together for the writer where, you're not sure if he's actually died. I thought it was a holodeck experience. Like Ron was tricking him into they'd beamed him into a holodeck and we're going to set him up to think this way. That's why he was playing the old Nagus. But no, they didn't do that. It was just a dream. And then as you were saying, I kind of expected the strangling to be Rom or like shaking him or something, trying to wake him up was what I thought, not Garrick.
Yeah. Also, man, watching all the different ways that you can be murdered in the holodeck is really fucking dark.
Yep. Doesn't like hanging, doesn't like neck snapping. I thought they did that's another good thing of, that's another good example of the writer coming up with satisfying reasons for why he wouldn't want to have any of those things done to him. They even came up with a good one for poison, which is Quark is like, well, if I know the food is poison, I'm never going to eat anything, so I just won't do it. Yeah. There's a lot of ways to kill yourself in the holodeck. Let's see, is there anything else? I don't really think so. We talked about the baby, talked about all that, talked about the transplant. No, I don't think so. Did you have anything else you wanted to talk about, or are we done with this one?
Yeah, I think unrelated to the episode, sort of. Well, first of all, the one thing about the baby thing I didn't mention was that, knowing that Nana Visitor was actually pregnant at the time makes that make more sense, because the first thing I thought was like, why would you pick Kira for this?
Mm-hmm.
Kira is the least is the person that would make the least amount of sense to do this to, but that would be good if they were going to tell a story with that instead of her just be like, yeah, I'm pregnant now. It's great.
Right. You could do it if you were going to really focus on Kira's reaction to it, but the show is not concerned with Kira's reaction to anything that's going on.
Yeah, I was thinking like, man, just give the baby to Dax. Give her something to do.
Yeah. Dax has had kids before, too.
Oh,
so,
really? I didn't know that.
Well, it's one of the previous hosts would have had kids.
Oh, right. But that kind of segues me into, did you watch that clip from the Deep Space Nine documentary where they were talking to Terry Farrell?
Yeah, she really came across well in that.
Yeah, and I found it really enlightening when she's like, I was doing the best that I could because I didn't know what my character was supposed to be, because every time they talked to me about it, they told me something different. I was like, that makes a lot of sense.
So for people who don't know, I posted a link on the Discord chat where it's just a clip from the DS9 documentary that's coming out, and they were Ira Stephen Bear was interviewing Terry Farrell about what she thought about the role, and she was kind of she was a little bit. It sounded like she comes across as being a little bit disappointed that she was too young. That A, the producers were confused in what they wanted her to be, and B, she was too young to really represent the wisdom that the character is supposed to represent. Like she didn't know when she was 27 filming this how to convey what the character needed to get conveyed. So I thought it was a nice, like a very honest interview. I thought it was pleasant to watch and listen to.
Yeah, it was. I liked her, or I was interested by her going into how she didn't feel like she had enough life experience to play that character.
Yeah.
And it's, I mean, I guess you could kind of take that or leave that, because like, well, I mean, if you're a good actor, you're a good actor. But yeah, it's being that kind of self-aware that it's not quite working and not really knowing how to fix it is fascinating.
Yeah.
And being like self-aware, but not like bitter about it. Cause obviously, I mean, she was on the show forever, so it was fine.
Yep.
But, yeah, I'll be interested to see the rest of that documentary.
Yeah. The only other thing I wanted to talk about is when we do our season wrap-up podcast, I want to talk about this more, but you had brought it up as the serialized nature of Keiko and the O'Briens. At this point, how does the serialization feel for you across the show? I'll get more into this, so I won't really give you my thoughts about this until the next episode not the 2 episodes from now, but what are your thoughts about this? As you've seen the entire season so far, to like how they're handling everything. I've asked you this before. I'm just curious if anything's changing.
I think they're doing a pretty good job with it. Sorry. I think they're still straddling the line between serialized and episodic, and I think they're handling it pretty well. Because even the ones that aren't really super serialized, they can still drop things in here or there to make it not feel completely out of place. But yeah, I think they're doing a good job.
Okay. Yeah, we'll end it there. So do you think that would you say the O'Brien storyline is, do you have a problem with the O'Brien storyline here? Or do you think that the serialized nature of the O'Brien storyline, is it even fair to judge it because of the situation that set up that storyline? Or, you know what I mean? Or is it a misfire on the serialized storytelling of the show, the way that they handle this? Or is it something outside of that is to blame for what I consider to be a fairly bad story going on into this?
I would have to wait and see what they end up doing with it. Because I feel like it still has all the potential there to do something interesting, in spite of the way that they set it up. God, excuse me.
Well, see, that's so that's what's interesting to me, because I think if I'm judging the show on what I think the serialization is, the show is still largely episodic more than it is serial. So the storyline that they've inserted here doesn't work for the way that the storytelling works on the show, because they don't do anything with it immediately. Like, to make it a Star Trek episode at this point in time, you kind of need something in there. Like, that's the conflict house. You need one little bit of something to really go on. If this was a more serialized show, I would say it still is kind of a crappy way to write it in, even though I think that they should be able to do things with it down the line, because of how out of nowhere it feels very artificial to the whole thing of how it's brought in. And maybe that's the pregnancy talking, but it's like I don't know. I feel it's in this weird nether zone between episodic and serialized storytelling, and it doesn't really satisfy either one, at least in this episode. It's not particularly, there's nothing interesting about it. It's just moving a chess piece from here to there. Yeah,
it is very, I mean, it's a fairly big change that they just sort of like drop it. It's like, it's not unlike if she just showed up next week pregnant.
Right.
Like there's not a lot behind the story driving it forward. It does just feel like, well, this is happening now. Don't really pay attention to it.
Yep.
So if they don't do anything else interesting with it, that's a bummer. That's disappointing. But yeah, I mean, having not seen where they go yet, I think I would hold my judgment until I see what they do or what they don't do with it. But yeah, I would agree that it is a serialized element that doesn't feel like it's really, there's any kind of, oomph to it or love behind the story. It seems like a necessity.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. All right, so we'll take a break. I will say just before we go to break that it reminds me of, in my opinion, the sitcom Friends jumps the shark when the characters switch apartments. That's like so anytime a character on the show switches apartments is what I consider to be a jumping the shark type moment. I don't think DS9 falls through into that, but Friends certainly did.
There's a similar episode of The Simpsons that I felt like was the hard drawn line where The Simpsons started to get bad, where I think it's in season 10, I think, where they're dumping so much garbage or something underneath Springfield that Springfield starts to implode on itself. Mm-hmm. And so they at the end of the episode, they pull up stakes and move the entire town like 3 miles east or something like that. So they just move all the buildings, everything else, and they just move it. And obviously it's The Simpsons. You're not supposed to take it seriously, but I took that as like, this is not a very good story. And like from that point on, it's just like consistently worse.
We're going to take a break. We're going to play an audio clip. We're going to come back, read some patron thoughts, give our final thoughts about body parts.
One step at a time. Yeah. We're almost there. Prepare for docking. Thrusters back to half. Yes. Nice landing, Captain. Let me know when you want to get underway again.
Okay, so, excuse me. If you start that over again. Okay, so
can we do a podcast that's just coughing for 30 minutes?
I think we're well on our way here at this point. So We'd ask for.
Wes, I would just like to say. How would you respond?
We'd ask for ratings and reviews, and no one would be able to do it because they'd be coughing too much to be able to click the little thumbs up button on the iTunes. There'd just be a lot of people coughing. All right, so we read Patron thoughts. You support the show on patreon.com, which is a wonderful thing to do and much appreciated. We read the thoughts that you have about upcoming episodes, starting with Holly McLaughlin. Body Parts, this is the best Quark episode, in my opinion. He's beautifully himself, struggling between what he believes is right and what he really wants. Garrick's failure to come up with an acceptable assisted suicide plot could have been cliched, but it works well. The dream sequence is hilarious, and the ending is sweet and touching without being saccharine. Moving on to Stephen Cobbs' Body Parts, more proof that having two non-human Quark and Garrick characters interact is really interesting to see. Zam Nuclear Wessel says, I always forget how good this one is. On latest viewing, I think Quark's delivery of as a Ferengi is an imitation of how Gowron says things like Klingon and for your house, maybe even in in-character one since they've met. And the list of unacceptable ways to die sounded like a reference to Dorothy Parker's 8-line poem, Resume, which he has a link to the poem. Then he says, there are several ways that could have complicated...
This is a TV show podcast, not a books podcast, okay? Take that shit to the library, man.
That's right. Take that couplet and shove it up your ass. There are several ways they could have complicated the plot about this by getting into Brunt arranging the false diagnosis, or the dream being a holosuite plot by Rom to keep Quark alive. That was my idea. Yeah, that's right. And then, or difficulties calling off Garrick, or Kira thinking the O'Briens are trying to proposition her, but they probably made the right call keeping it all simple. In my headcanon, however, all of these things happened. That is a good point he makes, Clay. There's a lot of different outcomes you could have gone in. There's a lot of different directions you could have gone in this episode, and they chose a very straight ahead one, but there was a lot of potential for ways that they wanted to go.
So he has a headcanon where the O'Briens and Kira get freaky with each other?
Yes. Kira thinks that it was your joke. Kira thinks that the O'Briens are trying to proposition her instead of asking her to move in.
Ah, I see.
Menage. So,
have you ever heard the Isaac Hayes song Menage a Trois? It's pretty awesome.
No, he has I've been putting random. I found this channel I put up on the Discord. I put the link to. It was Godsmack and Spandau Ballet.
Oh, I listened to that. It was surprisingly good, but it also reminded me how much I hate Godsmack.
There was one, I think his best one, if people want to look it up, it's look up Marvin Gaye Heard It Through the Grapevine and Rats Round and Round.
Ooh, I have heard that one. That is very good.
That one's like perfect. It fits perfectly. It's really amazing. I'll put a link. I'll try to in the video description. Keith Orr says, howdy, long-time listener, first-time commenter. I'm watching my way through Trek for the first time, and I saw a Ferengi on TNG. I thought I'd hate them, but come DS9, Quark has become one of my top 5 characters. I'm wondering how their world works. How can the Liquidator from their homeworld come and take all of Quark's things? Surely their laws are not really applicable on a space station near Bajor. I would think Odo or Sisko would have something to say with it. Also, everyone comes in the end bits and pieces for Quark. Surely he wouldn't need to restock since he could just use the replicator. And speaking of the replicator, didn't his one-time rival use replicators to make new gambling machines? Why can't he just replicate? That's a good question. What is the power? Did I just miss it? What is the power that Brunt has over Quark where he can stop him from having a bar? Is it just all Ferengi needs to operate under the Ferengi Commerce Authority? I guess that's the point of it.
I guess, yeah. He's got one of those stickers on the ready that he can put
up. Sticker stays up on the door, too, which is a nice touch.
Yeah. Like for the rest of the show, you mean?
They resolve it, but for the episodes until they resolve it. Yeah.
How does he operate if he can't? Like I did notice that the terms of the deal were very Ferengi based.
Yes.
So he can. I feel like the loophole there is he can still serve everybody who he usually serves because he's the only Ferengi on the ship on the place.
Brunt didn't really think that one through, I don't think, if that's his punishment for him. Matthew Ross says, Body Parts, knowing what we now know, did they actually have a story, or were the writers just trying to help the affair and pregnancy of Siddig and Visitor, who weren't divorced yet? The beaming over of the baby from Keiko to Kira, it was so ridiculous even when I saw it originally that I knew as well as the rest of the planet that knew that she was pregnant. It's barely a B-plot. I still think it had more to do with the affair than Star Trek. Anyway, going to the Age story, the real question was where was that lawsuit against the Doctor, or a complaint to have Brunt be brought up on charges? Rom is predictably sweet, and the double duty as the first Nagus was mildly interesting. Although I do like Liquidator Brunt, this was such a nothing episode that I don't think Combs added anything to it. Anyway, yes, Quark, you have friends. We all love you. No, really, let's cliche the ending so we can all come together to support our local crime boss. Oddly, in the next episode, he seems to be wearing the same gaudy outfits as before, and the bar is running. But it's running with a sticker on the door. Running with a sticker on the door. What was the point here? I would disagree. Jeffrey Combs adds something to every episode that he's in. He takes these silly characters and turns them into memorable things here. His whole scene with explaining when he makes his appearance to Quark. I love the scene between him and Armin Shimmerman are just kind of playing off of each other, and just the delight that Combs is playing as this character who's twisting the knife in Quark is delightful in my opinion. Yeah,
he's great. I wish he was in everything. I was thinking about that. He's as I was watching it, he's one of those actors where it's like he pops up and stuff from time to time, but he's never had, aside from Reanimator, he's never had something that was just like his thing,
his own, yeah.
But I mean, I guess that's the plight of the character actor, you know.
Yes. Yep. Who's that? It's that guy. Actors, as they're called. Kyle Barrett.
He's not. Sorry, he's not. I feel like he's not brought into things as much anymore as he used to be, and like the people. I feel like when he was in. Let's put it this way. I don't think he's had like a nostalgic renaissance the way a lot of other people have. Because he was working a lot, obviously, through the 90s and stuff, and, you know, people know him from Star Trek, people know him from Reanimator. If you've never seen Peter Jackson's The Frighteners, I highly recommend it because he's fucking amazing in that movie. But he kind of hasn't, I haven't seen him be that like, oh shit, this is the guy we got for our you know, throwback character that we that would be like the Bruce Campbell you know, role or something like that.
Yeah, that's true. I wonder what the last thing he was. I'll look it up afterwards. I'll let you talk and I'll look it up.
He was doing a couple of years ago. He was doing a one-man stage play where he played Edgar Allan Poe.
Okay,
and it was directed by Stuart Gordon, the guy who directed Reanimator. And apparently it was fantastic, and it came through Boston. It was actually at the Somerville Theater, and I didn't manage to get to go see it. I would have loved to see it, but I guess through the play, he gets progressively drunker.
Okay,
and it's just like a meditation on Poe's life and stuff. I really wish I could have seen it.
Looks like he does a lot of voice work recently.
Yeah,
a lot of video games, a lot of animated stuff.
I am shocked that he has not been on like one of those CW shows, the DC shows.
He was on Gotham.
Oh, he was on. Okay, perfect. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Like that seems. It blows my mind that he hasn't been on one of those shows, and apparently he has. So.
His Gotham role is just called Office Manager in 2 episodes, though. So maybe not that. Okay. Yeah, maybe not that big of a role, but he has been on it.
I think about that because I'm currently watching the newest season of Legends of Tomorrow, which is way better than it should be. And their nostalgic cast member this year is Tom Wilson, who played Biff in Back to the Future. Yes, and he's great. He's awesome.
So one of his most recent things, he's in the Lego DC Supervillains video game. He voices the Scarecrow.
Ooh,
interesting.
Good choice.
So Kyle Barrett is the last comment. Body parts. The Quark storyline is some good morbid fun, although all the Ferengi scenes seem to go on for a little too long. The Garrick scenes are amazing, although I wish that the second half of the episode kept showing Garrick try and kill Quark in elaborate Wile E. Coyote type ways that always fail. I enjoyed the It's a Wonderful Life ending, and luckily it's without the boring previous 2 hours of the film. Hot take. # hot take. The baby storyline is fine for a novel way to write visitors' pregnancy into the show, but the focus was misplaced. This is Kira the freedom fighter, the soldier, the terrorist. She never thought she would settle down. She never thought she was going to have a kid. And then suddenly she's facing a couple of months of pregnancy with a child that is not even hers and moving in with a new family. It's fascinating to explore, but sadly they focus purely on the O'Briens. Also, Wes, if one of the audio clips in the podcast can be O'Brien saying, "Prepare for docking," followed by Keiko sighing loudly, that would be great. Absolutely, Kyle. I'll do that for you.
I will say I agree. If Kira's going to have a kid, it should be like she should be in a Jeep on the Mexico border with a German Shepherd driving off into the sunset as the storm comes in, like at the end of Terminator.
Smoking a cigar as she's pregnant, not giving a fuck whatsoever. Yeah, I would say they don't even focus on the O'Briens. It's just like there's a lack of focus on anything. They just are kind of, everyone's just kind of there. It is
After a certain point, I actually kind of forgot that the storyline was actually happening. Like it happens, and then they duck back into the Ferengi stuff for so long. When they came back, I was like, oh right, I forgot about this.
Yes, 100%. Let's see. That's it. Those are all the comments. Thank you, patrons. Thank you for leaving your thoughts about that one. There's a lot of thoughts about that one, actually. That's a popular episode, it seems. We have one more, so get your comments in for Broken Link, which is the season finale. Clay, what are you going to give this one? Or I can go first. I'll go first because I always ask you to go first. I'm going to give this one a solid 3, which seems to be the stamp of approval for the Ferengi. I am like Brunt the Liquidator. I come in with my sticker. It says 3 on it, and I stick it on the door of every Ferengi episode. The O'Brien stuff is terrible. The Ferengi stuff is pretty good, but nothing that would really cause me to either recommend this or this would be one of those episodes. If I'm thinking about the season and I wanted to do a curated list, I would skip this episode. I would say you don't need to watch this one at all. So all in all, that ends up being a 3 for me.
Yeah, I would agree. Solid 3. I think this one is rewarding if you've been watching the show consistently up to this point, because if you haven't, it feels kind of like, well, it's a little. I think it's a little too melodramatic for a first timer or someone who hasn't been following Quark up to this point.
Yeah.
But for what it is, I enjoy it. I think it's pretty good. I like what they do with Quark, and it'll be interesting to see what they do moving forward.
All right. So, excuse me, we got one episode left, the season finale. It's called Broken Link. We'll be getting to that soon. If you guys want to support the show, you can follow the social media links as Facebook, Twitter. It's all the generic junk that everyone has. You can also go to the Discord where we do a lot of the chit chats about the shows. People yell at me for not liking Star Trek books. They give me recommendations. I buy Star Trek books. I read 10 pages and I say never again.
You know why?
What's that?
Because this is a television podcast, Wes. It's not a book podcast.
I'm starting my Star Trek book club. You guys are all invited. I'll bring a lot of hard alcohol just so that we can get through these horrible books. That's about it. The Discord, patreon.com/the Pensky File. If you want to support the show, that's much appreciated. It's the best way to support the show is patreon.com/the Pensky File. You get a bunch of perks. We did TNG trivia the other day. Played that with a bunch of patrons. That went really well. We did the Tombstone episode. We've got a whole bunch of
Unforgiven, excuse me.
God damn it. We did Unforgiven. We've got about 36 podcasts that are available if you sign up to become a patron. All that for your listening pleasure. And
keep your ears open for the cough with Wes and Clay. I think we should do another one that's a follow-up that's just like the beginnings of point making. Yeah. So it's like we just trade off being like, well, the thing about this part is, well, let me back up for a second. I think when you get to this point in the show, but before I get to there, I think we should talk about one thing first. Like, I think it should be 40 minutes of that.
We should, yeah. I would call that podcast audio blue balls. Like you start a topic and you just do like you never finish a point about anything. You just do like an incredibly frustrating thing.
I have to say that's not entirely an original joke because Fred Armisen used to do a character on SNL where he was a observational comedian who would pull jokes from the headlines, and he would read the headline, and it would be like, Congress sending out $2,000 of aid or $2 billion of aid for X, Y, and Z, and be like, the thing about this is, well, okay, but before we get to that, like that was and it was, oh my God, it was the funniest thing I've ever seen in my life.
Check out Patreon, support the show there. It's much appreciated. I think that's it. Clay, do you have anything you want to say?
Poser 4 should be coming out pretty soon, I think. Night Moves is on the shelves if you want to pick that up too. And Bat Ass Podcast for all your Batman the Animated Series needs. I think Sean and I are actually going to be recording Mask of the Phantasm, I want to say next weekend. So if you want, we're going to do Mask of the Phantasm, but we're going to do some questions if anybody gives a shit. So if you have any questions that you would like us to answer, you can send them to battasspodcast@gmail.com, BATTASS podcast@gmail.com. And if we don't get any questions, we'll probably just make them up. So
Yes. Yeah. That's the best way forward. I think that's it. We got one episode of season 4 DS9 left. It's called Broken Link. I've said it 3 times. I'll say it again. One more, then we'll do our wrap up, and then we're on to season 5 after that. So thank you guys very much for listening. Thank you for supporting the show. It's much appreciated. I don't think I have anything else that I want to say. I feel like there was something. I don't think I have anything, though.
only
All right.
2 more months, Wes,
To what?
till Discovery comes back.
Oh, that's right. How do I feel? We have 2 more shorts. We've got a short coming in December too, and then January, and then we get back to Discovery. So yeah, that'll be something. Yeah, no, I was going to say something about Discovery, but we'll save that for another podcast. We've gone long enough. Clay, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Guys, thank you very much for listening. It's much appreciated. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Hope you're enjoying the show. We'll be back in a couple days. See ya.